I'm not a scientist, but don't you think it would be more than coincidental that we as humans just happen to be in a place with a perfect climate, habit, and environment for our survival? I think this shows that God designed a place for us. Do you agree? And this is somebody from Sicily, New York. I never heard of Sicily, New York, but that's where they're writing from. So that's interesting. So somebody is and again, supporting, saying, it makes more sense to me that there's a God.
Yeah. No, I think, to be honest, your intuition is correct, but you don't want to call that intuition a scientific proof per se. But do I think it's beyond coincidence? I do, and I think of that intuitively, but I also have some scientific reasons for believing that, not simply because of where we are on the planet Earth, but because of arguments that I'll be discussing in some future shows, but essentially what's called fine-tuning at the Big Bang. And remember that the Big Bang is really a barrier to causation. So 13.8 billion years ago, when our universe exploded, and we have a lot of evidence for this, right? We know that such an explosion took place. We know that, you know, all the forces of the universe kind of unraveled, right? And you know, gravity became the space-time continuum, that the strong nuclear force rolled off, leaving the electroweak force, and the weak force rolled off, leaving the electromagnetic force, and so forth. We know that this happened, but in order for all that to happen in precisely the ways that they happened, you have to have some really important initial conditions and constants in place. Now, I'm not going to get too technical. I'm going to try not be too technical, but I want you just to catch the insight of what a lot of very fine physicists are saying, and why those fine physicists are believers in God and believers in an intelligent creator. Just take this, for example. The low entropy that we need low entropy in our universe at the Big Bang, right? At the very beginning of our universe, we need low entropy. What's low entropy? That means we need a lot of potential to do work, in order to get any life form at all, right? If you have a lot of potential to do work, you could get life. But if you didn't have potential to do work, so you had high entropy, then you're not going to get a life form, and you're certainly not going to get the maintenance or evolution of a life form. You can just skip it. Now, this guy, a very famous physicist, Roger Penrose, he calculated the odds against getting low entropy at the universe, right? We need this to have a life form. He calculated the odds against getting low entropy at the universe by pure chance. You know what the odds are? It's 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 123 to 1 against. That's a double exponent. I mean, if you reduced it to a single exponent, that'd be a 10, and then in the exponent you have a 1 with 123 zeros after it. So the exponent would be a trillion, 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 trillion. Now, if you look at that number, if you wrote it out, as a single number with each zero, say, being 10-point type, our solar system could not hold that number. That's the odds again. It's the same odds as a monkey typing the entire corpus of Shakespeare by random tapping of the keys in a single try. I mean, essentially, you order the monkey to type the Shakespeare, you walk in a month later, he's been randomly tapping on the keys, and you see there in perfect folio condition Macbeth and Hamlet, and you think to yourself, my, this is unusual. Indeed, it is very unusual. Yet this is precisely what occurred. I mean, we got low entropy with those odds against it. We got it at the Big Bang. Do I think that this happened by pure chance? I do not. I think a very intelligent God placed all that fine-tuning into the initial conditions of the universe precisely to give all the work potential that we needed, even though the odds against it were absolutely phenomenal, right? I mean, the odds of a monkey typing Shakespeare, and boom, then the explosion happened. Then the symmetry began. Then the life began to develop. We're in a universe that is fine-tuned for life. In other future programs. I'm going to give you all kinds of examples of this from universal constants and everything else. But right now, I think there are a lot of fine physicists out there who don't believe for a second that this universe just kind of happened by pure chance. Some people try to take the multiverse route out of it. So in other words, okay, our universe is no big deal, right? We're in a big multiverse out there, and that multiverse is like a big mega universe that's coughing out little bubble universes, and trillions upon trillions of little bubble universes. And of course, finally, after 10 to the 123 bubble universes, we got one universe fit for life like ours that had a low enough entropy that could support life in it. Now, you can say that if you want to. There's only two little problems. The first little problem with the multiverse is, of course, it violates Occam's razor. Basically, that nature favors elegance, not big bloviated explanations that try and get out of, right, a creation account like trillions upon trillions of bubble universes, right? As Paul Davies once put it, the multiverse. That's like bringing excess baggage to cosmic proportions. Indeed it is. But the point, of course, is there's even one more fatal problem with the multiverse, which makes the creation hypothesis more tenable. And that is that every known multiverse hypothesis must have fine-tuning in its initial conditions and constants in order to prevent disastrous scenarios like bubble universes colliding into one another or getting into the gravitational range of one another, where these huge gravitational perturbations would be shaking the bubble universes like a jello, which would be very bad for life forms. Now, the point is, if every multiverse hypothesis that we have has to have fine-tuning in its initial constants and conditions, you got to ask yourself, does it solve the problem of fine-tuning and design? No, it does not. It only moves it back one step. It only moves it back to the multiverse itself, in which case you have to ask, well, who put the fine-tuning and the design into the multiverse so that it would have a slow roll of bubble universes, etc.? So this is not a sufficient cause. If you ask me whether I think the creation hypothesis is better than the multiverse hypothesis, I'm going to say the creation hypothesis is better than the multiverse because it absolutely solves the problem without making recourse to other unexplained fine-tuning of the multiverse. And so it's a preferred, rational, scientific explanation for the low entropy of our universe. Now, if you ask even further, well, are there other physicists who would agree with you? Well, take Fred Hoyle, for example, who used to be the atheistic gadfly of the century, right? Every time, a theistic hypothesis came up in physics, he would bat it down, and with a kind of an atheistic counterposition, until one day, of course, his partner, William Fowler, comes up and says, Fred, I've been just looking at, the resonance level of carbon and oxygen and beryllium and helium and hydrogen. I've been trying to figure out what would it take to get the resonance levels perfect so we could have an abundance of carbon in our universe. And of course, after he shows Fred the problem, here's the quote that Fred Hoyle comes out with after he understands it. He basically, and this is a paraphrase, right? He says, I don't think there are any blind forces worth speaking about. It seems to me that some super calculating, super intellect has monkeyed with the constants of physics and those of biology and chemistry as well. I consider this to be beyond the shadow of a doubt. He later went on to say, the odds of our getting an abundance of carbon in our universe by pure chance is similar to a tornado blowing through a junkyard, assembling a Boeing 747 ready for flight. Now, these are the things that I consider to be convincing. And of course, you can go right back to the Big Bang, and you can go right back to the setting of the constants. Yeah, I do think the creation hypothesis, the intelligent creation hypothesis, is not only as competitive as a multiverse hypothesis for explaining these incredible anthropic coincidences, I think it's better. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't fall back unexplained
So,
fine-tuning
Father,
in
let
the
me
multiverse.
let me ask you that. So,
yeah.
so is that now the universe
Sure.
according to Hoyle? Is that what we call that? His approach there? That might work for us. Let me
Yeah,
ask,
that's right.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you another question with that too. If what you're saying,
Right.
which makes sense obviously to us, sitting here probably watching on EWTN, we're tending
Right.
to believe in the Lord, etc., in His world. What would you say to somebody who
Yeah.
says, well, you're just backing into that? And the other side would be, if these other people are as intelligent or even more intelligent than you, why, if the evidence is so obvious, do they insist on coming up with bubble universes? Are they trying to just make it fit what they already believe?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, at the end of the day, the real problem is not a problem of the mind, right? Science is never going to be able to disprove God. I mean, prima facie, right? Science can't disprove God. Why is that? Because scientific evidence is observational. If you don't observe it, if you can't measure it in the empirical world, it's not evidence for science. Now, where do you get observational evidence from? Inside the universe. We can't observe anything outside of our event horizon in the universe. We can't. Now, God, by definition, is beyond our universe. It's absolutely beyond our universe, right? So beyond physical reality, beyond restricted reality. So how can you disprove a being which is outside of our universe, which is outside of our physical reality? How can you disprove a being that's beyond our universe with evidence that's used or gathered from within our universe? Answer, you can't. It's impossible. It'd be like a cartoon character, right? Trying to gather all the evidence from inside the cartoon to disprove the cartoonist. It won't work.
Right,
The
exactly.
point, of course, at the end of the day is if science can't disprove God, there's no scientific reason for atheism. It's impossible to justify atheism by science.